Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to Wearable Tools for a Lifetime of Women's Health webinar in partnership with People Science. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to our incredible speakers that we have today. ŌURA Grant, lead scientist at People Science, Marianne Self, founder of FemmeHealth Alliance, Dr. Micah Sharp, Deputy Director of Diagnostics at the Gates Foundation, Laura Yeasis, CEO of OsteoBoost Health, and Jill Angelo, Vice President of Women's Health and Commercial Partnerships at ŌURA. We have super interesting presentation and panel discussion ahead of us, but before we start, just a couple of reminders from our side. This webinar, as you can see, is being recorded, and we will share the recording with everyone who registered by the end of this week. We will also be sharing the resources and chat transcript. So please use the chat, tell us where you are joining us from, link your LinkedIn profiles, tell us what you're working on. We would love for you to connect with one another, with our speakers, maybe find a way to collaborate or to support one another. And as mentioned, you will receive the recording of everything on Friday. Just make sure to select everyone when sending your message so that everyone can see it. Otherwise, only hosts and panelists will be able to see it. If this is your first time joining a WOW event, I will just say a couple of words about WOW. Both Maria and myself, we are here. So you will hear from us throughout the session, and in between, we will also be typing some resources in the chat as well. And this topic is very close to our hearts because WOW actually stands for Women of Wearables, and Women of Wearables started as a small meetup group aiming to connect women in wearable tech almost 10 years ago in London. And over the years, we expanded quite a bit and we focused a lot on women's health. And so far, I think we did more than 185 events and different conferences, webinars like this one. A couple of weeks ago, we held our Menopause 2.0 conference. We also do FemTech Accelerate and Knowledge Hub sharing sessions with some of our partners on different topics from product development, manufacturing, investing, IP, and so much more. So if you would like to find out more about us, you are welcome to do so and join our community on our website. We're absolutely everywhere, and we like to hear from you, whether that's on LinkedIn or you want to send us an email. Please subscribe to our newsletter. We have some very exciting projects that we are planning for the fall. We will be covering breast health, menopause, and AI in women's health. So make sure to follow us on LinkedIn to be the first one to hear about those exciting events coming up. Now, we are super grateful that we have amazing partners who are partnering with us to bring this event live. People Science. People Science is a new kind of clinical research organization focused on unlocking the power of alternative medicine and functional nutrition through rigorous science, and using their proprietary platform, ŌURA, they conduct decentralized clinical trials that integrate research into daily life, allowing brands to capture complex biological and behavioral data at scale. And I'm so pleased that we have ŌURA Grant, a lead scientist at People Science, joining us today, who will give a brief presentation about what they do and who will be then later on moderating the panel as well. ŌURA, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. I will stop sharing my screen and I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. All right, one moment. Let me get my share going.
I'll turn off myself, but just a quick reminder for everyone to choose the option everyone in the chat box so everyone can see your LinkedIn profiles and comments. Otherwise, only us as hosts and panelists will be able to see them. Thank you.
All right. Can you all see this screen here? Purple background?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, so hello and welcome, and thank you very much to Women of Wearables for providing a platform for this discussion. I've been seeing people write in from all over the world, and our panelists that we're going to be hearing from are also calling in from all over the world. So I'm so grateful to have you all here today. My name is Azure Grant, and I lead our research at People Science. By background, I'm a neuroscience PhD focused on development of wearable tools and interventions for women's health. So the topics today are deeply important to me, and many of these tools have actually played a personal role in my own and my family's healthcare. So love this topic. This group that we are going to be joined by is not only from all over the world, they are very broad in their expertise in identifying pressing problems in female health in the US and wider world, engineering the solutions, and in funding. So today we're actually going to start out with an overview of female physiology, sharing the background of why it is that wearables are uniquely suited to our needs. And then we're going to get into problems, why we don't yet see more clinical wearable product development reaching women, and what to do about it. So first, female physiology is dynamic with each stage of life impacting systems across the body in a coupled manner. This pertains from puberty all the way through fertility, infertility, pregnancy, and postpartum, and menopause, and all are accompanied by coordinated changes in temperature, autonomic nervous system activity, and more. So we're going to get into the details here because this systematic change is really essential to developing new wearable tools for the prediction, detection, and treatment of women across life. And what's more, this knowledge is actually in some cases over 100 years old. So we've been able to know that some of these patterns exist for a long time, but only in maybe the last 10, 15 years has it been possible to use wearable tools to actually measure these patterns and turn them into products. My heart is still in a neuroendocrinology lab, so I would be remiss not to show the reproductive axis when I have the chance at least once. If you're not familiar with it, I illustrated this little brain here up in the top left with a blown up cross section of reproductive and thermoregulatory interacting circuits. We don't need to get into all the details, but to say that these coordinate release of a neuropeptide called GnRH. Also, this area regulates body temperature. These signal to the pituitary gland, coordinating LH and FSH, and in turn, those signal down to coordinate the release of estrogen and progesterone from the ovaries. I show this all to indicate that those same neural circuits that coordinate body temperature and HRV actually receive feedback from within the hypothalamus, the pituitary just below the brain, and all the way down to the ovaries. This means that reading those patterns of things like temperature and HRV reveals the unique pattern of underlying hormones in each reproductive state. So decoding those patterns can let you predict or detect things like ovulation, pregnancy, labor, menopause, and more. Let's get into a specific example for a couple of minutes. The ovulatory cycle. I imagine a lot of you are familiar with natural cycles, the integration site for things like ŌURA ring data, Garmin data, and more in order to make predictions about ovulation. We're going to sound like meteorologists for a moment, but this is going to be the underlying reason that these things can work. So we have two illustrations here. Both show the duration of one ovulatory cycle beginning arbitrarily at menstruation, aka the start of the follicular phase at the left part of the axis. That's a phase dominated by estrogens. Middle of the graph on each graph is mid-cycle around the periovulatory phase. So this is about when an egg is released and when LH levels surge. And then the end portion of each of these illustrations called the luteal phase, characterized by dominance of progesterone, a phase tied to supporting that egg should it be fertilized. Now, the left illustration is mostly showing hormones. The right illustration is showing a general pattern of temperature. Those large curves are illustrating the main pattern, and there are actually little squiggles up at the top which show you what it would look like if you zoomed in with a microscope and looked at hour-to-hour change. So if we dig in a little deeper, estradiol rises in blue across that first portion of the cycle. It doesn't do so smoothly, but in speedy little spikes. This actually cools down the body, reflected in decreasing temperatures at right. After ovulation, the addition of progesterone actually warms the body and at once creates smaller, little irregular spikes. I say this to illustrate the direct relationship between the trend of change in estrogen and progesterone, its spiky patterning, and change in body temperature. Let's go on a zoom out to how this can work across all of life. So we are now looking at some panels of simulated data based on those collections that date back to 1925 with manual thermometers all the way up until the present day with modern wearables. Each graph shows a 16-month snapshot from infancy all the way to post-menopause. We're going to focus mainly on that ovulatory pattern and changes in its absence. So in infancy, obviously, there are no ovulatory cycles. Pubertal onset is characterized by the emergence of an ovulatory cycle and temperature. This stabilizes in adulthood, is eliminated by things like oral contraceptive use, and actually exhibits a very beautiful, predictable pattern of rise throughout the first trimester of pregnancy, stabilization and decline across the second, and unique patterning around the transition to labor. Postpartum, characterized by absence of cyclicity, especially if there is breastfeeding. And if we zoom forward later to perimenopause, this shows up as irregular cyclicity, with flat zones showing up as missed ovulations, lower amplitude oscillations paralleling declining and more erratic estrogen and progesterone flux, and some hot flashes in there. And finally, postmenopause, characterized by the absence of cyclicity and some hot flashes for a time. So why wearables matter for measuring all of this? They allow continuous monitoring of signals like the temperature one we've been discussing, but also other important signals like heart rate variability, heart rate, and more. I'm talking about ŌURA, Evie, Samsung, Garmin, Apple Watch, Ultrahuman, Happy Ring, Ringcon, Ava, Tempdrop. There are more of these all the time. And even now, which I'm very excited about and is quite new, there are even wearables that can provide treatment at different stages of female life, like OsteoBoost that we'll hear from ŌURA, Ember during menopause, and 8 Sleep. Why I think this is particularly crucial is that without a wearable, traditional workups in fertility and family health can take multiple years. They typically only come in after an individual has had significant disruption to quality of life or family planning. So an example is 3 years on average before a woman will get diagnosed with PCOS, now called PMOS. This is a clinical process that is expensive, inconvenient, and lengthy. Convenience of wearables is one of their, major boons. It allows you to monitor physiology in the real world without interruptions to your routine. Provides continuous monitoring rather than the single time points of blood samples taken in a doctor's office. And that pattern we've been discussing actually allows you to proactively rather than responsively identify problems. This can make a difference for diagnosis or treatment before symptoms or suffering lead to clinical care. I wanted to show you a few examples of particular applications. These are all going to be mock-ups using our own published research data, although you can find some of these applications in use in mobile apps today. First, fertility and infertility. As we've been discussing the regular cycle associated with cyclic, progesterone, estrogen, cardiac output, metabolic rate or temperature, and more. In the case of irregular cycles or absent cycles, for instance, in PMOS, formerly called PCOS, there is an absence of that cyclicity in progesterone and estrogen, as well as disrupted flux in cardiac output, lower metabolic rate, and other hormonal imbalances in insulin and androgens. How might these patterns show up on your phone? So this is an example analogous to what is currently done with natural cycles, a great example of how this is starting to come into the real world. You could think of this as predicting the peak timing of fertility in each cycle and showing that peak to a user to enable timed conception or pregnancy avoidance, or to show if fertility won't peak this cycle, which could provide an early context on anovulation to providers and, of course, that valuable individual feedback. Pregnancy is a next essential area because healthy pregnancy is a state of extreme vulnerability and also extreme resilience, characterized by that initial increase in temperature and heart rate and a decrease in HRV. This is driven by very complex underlying hormonal signals, including a big increase in progesterone, plasma volume, cardiac output, and metabolic rate. Now, not producing these changes in full amplitude or these adaptations to pregnancy is associated with greater risk of miscarriage, pregnancy complications, and emotional imbalances. So the goals with pregnancy wearables are early detection, longitudinal monitoring, and even labor prediction. So imagine being able to detect probable conception and implantation before an OTC over-the-counter pregnancy test would work, and even confirm that a pregnancy is off to a good start with prolonged high temperatures. One that is actually extremely close to my heart, as I recently had my first son, is utilizing pre-labor physiology, or the increase in estrogens and functional decrease in progesterone, among other factors at the end of pregnancy, to create a temperature-based tool that can provide an accurate due date for labor planning. So right now, due dates tend to be 12 days or so off on average, and with wearable data, we think we can get that down to around 4 or less. Now, there is much more beyond this, and that could range from postpartum care, providing tools that measure and promote close synchrony between mothers and babies, quantify recovery, or alert mothers to return to fertility. It could also be tools that would be used throughout perimenopause and menopause. So imagine automatically monitoring your vasomotor symptoms, sleep disruption, guiding clinicians in dosing and maintenance of HRT. Now, there are many challenges to a world in which all of these tools are on the market and usable by us and by our care providers. I'm just going to talk about a few of those, and I'm going to talk about one solution or one helper. Why aren't more of these on the market? So a first reason, in part, is validation. So many wearable companies live squarely in a wellness world, in part due to a regulatory burden of clinically validating tools. Lack of in-house research infrastructure can be another one. Conducting validation studies, clinical outcomes research, and implementation science can be beyond the skill set for the types of individuals that many institutions hire for. It can be expensive and challenging to hire an in-house lab for every new wellness startup. Along with that is need for budgetary efficiency. So in-house R&D timelines can be very fast, and the budgets can be smaller than traditional large, say, federal grants or FDA level study funding. This can mean that many companies do not have the resources to run a large trial and validate a clinical endpoint. And then finally, this ties into the need for additional funding. So federal investor-driven funding, with the understanding that these are long-term goals necessary to give women and families the healthiest start from the very beginning. And I know our panelists are going to have much more to say about these. I'm going to just talk about people science and how we are trying to address this problem from a clinical research perspective. So this is our team's contract and all of our personal laboratories for running remote clinical trials that integrate wearable data, biomarkers, surveys, medical histories, and more to evaluate interventions in the real world. And we like to talk about this as a very different or flipped on its head model from traditional clinical research. So at present, part of the reason that many of these pathways to clinical validation are long and expensive is a traditional academic research model. It's very top-down. Participants, here are these little people icons, the left on the bottom, have data that flows up to scholars and doctors, and ultimately these federal funding agencies in large part can decide what gets studied, how it gets studied. It takes place on university campuses or in clinics with smaller numbers of people, and can take years to complete, with results not necessarily ever reaching the original participants who donated data, also resulting in kind of narrow participant pools and maybe less motivation for people to contribute to research. In trying to flip this model on its head, we made the individual person, the woman in this case, the center of the research process. She can sign up for studies relevant to her health on a mobile application, pick the research that is most relevant to her, that scientists, regulators, manufacturers, and more are bringing to the platform. And results are actually always shared immediately back to a participant when she completes her study. We do this in order to decentralize the research, meaning people can join nation or worldwide, depending on the question, to reduce the costs without the overhead of maintaining an in-person facility, and to create a much more motivating framework where people want to come and answer the questions that are most relevant to them. My goal for this platform, which is currently, I think, over 65-ish% female, is to be the place where women and families can come to test out new tools that can monitor their health, from wearables to things like new ways of testing hormones, and to find the interventions that most help improve their specific health conditions. Okay, so altogether, wearables provide a really incredibly valuable opportunity for clinical grade predictions and even treatment in women's and family health. The challenge now is migrating the field of wearable tech from the more light touch wearable wellness area to a wider array of rigorous and clinically meaningful systems. And that means overcoming several barriers to innovation, funding, and regulation. And that is exactly why we have our panelists here. We have Marianne Self, Dr. Micah Sharp, Laura Yeases, and Jill Angelo with me to get into the weeds of how we get more of these tools into the real world. I'm going to stop sharing here and see all of you are coming on camera. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Azure, for this presentation. And I always learn something new. And today I was reminded of the fact that we actually cannot predict when the moment of labor will happen, when the labor will start. And when you mentioned on your slide, that was like, oh my God, imagine how awesome this would be if we could do this. All right. Panel is kicking off. We can start. I'll turn off myself, see if we have everyone with us. Give me 1 second.
All right.
Okay,
Ladies, let's see.
all our
We've got
speakers
Jill.
should be able to start their video now. I might have turned it off for a moment just so we have it easier. All right, here we are. Welcome, everyone.
Hello there.
Azure, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to say also to everyone in the audience right now, you can put a little question in the Q&A box at the bottom if you have any additional questions for our entire panel as we go along here. And I'll actually just quickly answer the one that came in during the talk, which asked about what our simulated data was. This I just used modeling to create an illustration of data at each stage of life. So that wasn't a particular person's data, but that was based on the research that shows what these patterns generally look like. All right, so we have Marianne, Dr. Sharp, Laura, and Jill here today. I think we're going to go around first and do a little bit of intros. So starting with Marianne, please give us a quick introduction to who you are. And I want to ask you with that, what do you think is the most important unmet need in women's health that wearables could help us address in the near future?
Thank you so much, Azure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Marianne Self. I'm a capital markets professional. I'm based in Zurich, Switzerland. I'm also the founder of FemmeHealth Alliance, a Swiss nonprofit that's focused on closing the structural gaps in women's health in research and in capital. My background is in institutional finance, and I work with private banks, family offices, and institutional allocators on capital strategy. And to your question, what I think is the biggest or significant unmet need. I think that, I think one of the things that fascinates me really about women's health is that for decades, and I think with wearables, we have been trying really hard to sort of understand highly dynamic biological systems from a handful of snapshots. And now with wearables, we have the opportunity, as you showed also on the screen, to capture data longitudinally, continuously, but also to be in a position where we can proactively predict. So that's really fascinating and really exciting. I think one of the areas where I see where I'm really excited about when it comes to wearables is also the area where I get a lot of questions from family offices, for example, who are looking to allocate, is where exactly is the opportunity? And I see that I think one of the greatest opportunities is where is in the sort of like the interpretation layer, that layer that sits sort of between the data and the clinical utility. It's still in the nascent phase, but I'm really excited where we're going with that.
Totally agree. And then next on my screen, ŌURA, you're there, and I think you have a really unique perspective with a wearable providing treatment. Introduce yourself and what do you think is the most important unmet need?
Sure. Well, thanks for including me in this great panel and one of my favorite topics. My name is Laura Gises. I'm the CEO of OsteoBoost Health, and OsteoBoost is the first and only FDA-approved device. It's a medical device, a Class 2 medical device to treat low bone density. Our indication for use is to improve bone strength in postmenopausal women with osteopenia, which is the first stage of bone loss and where half of all fractures happen. We also have a number of patients, about half, using it for osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a field where we've had almost no progress over the last 50 years, which is amazing and in stark contrast to cardiovascular conditions and cancer. More women die of hip fractures than breast cancer. So this is an area where we have unfortunately not had a lot of progress, yet half of all women will fracture in their lifetime. It's a very, very common problem. When we think of, little old ladies, they didn't all start little, right? So these are osteoporotic fractures that are harming them. So our goal is to really move the needle in preventing these fractures and allowing people to live, strong and independent lives. And we launched our product in 25, and we're on our way. And it's an exciting time. I think my unmet need that we're talking about, or what I'm looking for, is this area of osteoporosis has just had so little progress. And so I really advocate not just for our device, but for anything that will improve progress. And so earlier diagnosis, risk signs, getting people into the treatment path. I do think this whole field of wearables is raising our awareness and allowing people to take earlier intervention.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I remember a stat that by 2050, maybe around 35% of women are estimated to be menopausal worldwide. So it seems like the demand for this is only going to grow.
Right. And menopause is key in bone loss, right? You lose 15 to 20% of your bone around that menopause transition. And so we really want to be intervening before that, allowing people to monitor what's happening with their bone and, preventing or slowing that decline. Although it's never too late, even if they're intervening later.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. I want to let us introduce Dr. Micah Sharp. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your fantastic work and what you think the most unmet need that could be addressed by wearables is at the moment.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Micah. I'm a deputy director at the Gates Foundation. As my day job, I'm overseeing our portfolio around diagnostics and medical devices. But I'm also leading our work on women's health, on strengthening the women's health R&D ecosystem. And so this is really a connection of both of those spaces in a lot of ways. As some of you might be familiar, the Gates Foundation is one of the largest private foundations. It's primarily focused on making sure that everybody can live a fulfilling life and gets the time that they deserve. And so our three top line goals are to make sure that no mother or child dies of preventable causes, that infectious diseases are mostly eradicated, and that we bring billions of people out of poverty. And so our focus is primarily on populations in low and middle income countries. And I'm very excited about the possibility of devices more broadly, and wearables in particular, to really add something very important to the diagnostic toolkit that exists for populations in low resource settings. Because while we are limited when it comes to in vitro diagnostics with consumables, et cetera, devices actually have the possibility to really get to extremely low cost per test that will allow to reach populations that are living in situations where the annual cost in the healthcare system might just be somewhere between $25 and $50 per person. And so it's actually interesting because for us, oftentimes the device question is less on does every person have a wearable, because that's pretty far in the future. But for example, could you give a wearable to high-risk pregnant women and see and monitor them throughout the course of a pregnancy to see whether you can give them indications on when they need to seek care in a higher level facility? Or can you give wearables to healthcare workers and allow them to bring in some additional ideas there on how to best get to the next levels of care for their patients?
Okay, I'm going to be really excited to get into that example on high risk pregnancy, as you might have guessed. Totally agree. And I'm sure Jill is going to be excited to talk about that as well. So, Jill, maybe someone who this talk has been extremely applicable to with your work at ŌURA. Tell us a little bit about yourself and which you would pin as the most important unmet need.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Azure. Jill Angelo, VP of Women's Health and Commercial Partnerships here at ŌURA. And specifically, obviously, I'm obviously really excited about this entire conversation. I live and breathe wearables in women's health every single day, and just seeing the potential, whether it is in tracking or giving women kind of the language around what's happening in their bodies. Oftentimes, we're all pegged with it's just in your head. And for the first time, wearable data is actually giving true data and longitudinal data that help give words and agency to women to explain and have a better conversation with their care provider. But also the potential for detection, behavior change. Those are just some of the key areas that we're working on at ŌURA. Within our overall roadmap, we're focusing on women's health from anything from cycle tracking to birth control or pregnancy prevention to women who are trying to conceive and struggling and or not struggling around the fertility opportunity in their lives, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, menopause, cardiovascular health, obviously, and bone health. And really across that spectrum of a woman's life, I think for the first time, wearables really also allow us to go beyond just our reproductive health because it's all connected. And so I think the greatest potential or the sweet spot that wearable data provides for us in women's health is for the first time moving us from episodic care to longitudinal care or continuous. When we think about episodic care, healthcare is largely from doctor's appointment to doctor's appointment. And now with wearables, we get the opportunity to truly be continuous every single day, producing longitudinal data and trends that lead to so many things, whether it's earlier detection of PMOS, whether it is earlier detection of anovulatory cycles for a woman who's trying to conceive and struggling through her own fertility journey, whether it is tracking the impacts of menopause hormone therapy on an individual's heart rate and or other symptoms that she's experiencing, and getting to a resolution faster around, is it working? Is the dosage correct? How do we titrate medications that better allow a woman to feel the best she can with the interventions that she's receiving? So the applications are endless, lots to talk about. But again, if you think about from episodic care to longitudinal, continuous, always on, that's the key opportunity that we have with wearable data.
Absolutely. So the answer is almost every part of the lifespan is a place where there's a huge opportunity for improvement in clinical care with wearables. But tell me a little bit more about the operational challenges you're facing as you try to make this vision a reality. So you're within a wellness company, but obviously one that is doing a lot of clinical work as well. What do you think are the main barriers?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Azure. We've been largely wearable data seen as wellness, And to make that leap into clinical utility, we've got to cross thresholds of regulatory requirements around medical device. Where is wearable data and or the device now crossing into this realm of needing medical device clearance and or designation? When we come to detection, not necessarily, we're not getting into diagnosing, but when we come to detection and or signaling something for an individual that drives an action, oftentimes there's regulatory requirements that we need to align to. And so we're working specifically here in the US with the FDA around what does that criteria look like that is not within the wearable or within the wellness set of requirements. And it might not be on the class 2 medical device that is the same device designation as a pacemaker or an MRI machine. Where does that utility sit? I think that's probably the biggest operational challenge for us right now. Also, just in the conversations I have with clinicians every day, the data is powerful in patient care. However, how do we synthesize and get it into their workflows or into a way of using it that doesn't require extra effort or time? We know that the clinician patient engagement in an appointment is very restricted and needs to be efficient and effective. And so how do we move the data into that care model so that the clinician's equipped in the best way possible to work with the patient? And I think from a pure operational perspective, that's a gnarly challenge to figure out. We're working on it now.
That is a hard one, thinking about how do you take this beautifully designed app and make it talk to Epic and be something that is going to show up on a clinician's desktop that they understand how to interpret and speak to their patients about. And what do you show to the patient versus what do you show to the clinician is a super hard question. I was really excited that you were going to be here with ŌURA specifically, since ŌURA, you have helped move wearables just from measuring to actually treating a condition. You've just gotten funding for this project in a bigger way. And I've heard you've also been working on this product with NASA. I know ŌURA is also working with NASA. So can you tell a little bit more about your clinical path and a little bit more about what you think the future relationship will be between sensing devices and therapeutic devices?
Yeah, so I'll start with the clinical path. So, the NASA origin is because astronauts lose bone in space. So, bones respond to mechanical forces, to stimulation, no gravity, no stimulation, you lose bone density. And they saw that vibration was able to arrest that bone loss for astronauts. But when those whole body vibration platforms were used in kind of the outside of the astronauts, the data has not been consistent, especially at the hips and spine. So we took this approach of putting it in a wearable. And the benefit of the wearable is it's easier to comply because you can wear OsteoBoost when you're cooking or going for a walk or at your standing desk. So that's the beauty of wearables is it's almost built into the name. You're wearing it oftentimes while you do other things. It's not interrupting what you do. You can kind of build it into your routine. And then our wearable is strategically positioned over the anatomy that's most vulnerable with fractures, the hips and spine. So through SBIR grants, we got funding for the clinical trial. And actually, one of the things that we tried to do was while we were doing the trial, we tested an over-the-counter version of the device. This was actually back in 2020. And what we saw when we advertised this device on Facebook and other places is that people were really interested, but the purchase rates were pretty low. And we tested different prices and it wasn't a price issue. And when we spoke with these patients, what they said is, how do I know that it works? Because I'm not just spending the money, I'm spending the time, right? I need to wear this 30 minutes a day. And before I commit to that, I want to really know that it works. And so that supported or kind of confirmed our strategy that everything we did really had to be grounded in, we know it works because we did a gold standard randomized controlled trial with objective data at baseline in 12 months. So that's, and then with that data, we were able to get an FDA de novo approval, a class 2 approval, and that allows us to claim to talk about treating a disease. So otherwise, it's a general wellness claim, that you're kind of improving your health. It's essentially the same claim that you could, make with, just exercise or a massager or something like that. And so, that early learning that people really needed to have confidence that it worked and by how much, and if they're making decisions on where this fits relative to other interventions that they're planning with their physician, it all comes down to the data.
Do you see a world in which women might know that they need a device like OsteoBoost earlier because they're able to monitor their perimenopausal transition with another kind of wearable? Or, does OsteoBoost work better kind of the earlier you intervene once you need it?
Okay, so let me answer the second question first. Everything works better when you intervene earlier. So intervening on cholesterol, intervening on blood pressure, intervening on bone, it all works better earlier because you keep your arteries open, you keep your bone density, so it's easier to maintain. It's always harder to build back up. Also, the younger you are, the more metabolically active are your bones. So we saw in our clinical trial that the women in their 50s had a larger response to therapy than the women in their 60s and 70s. All ages responded, but the younger group had an enhanced response. So we know that, and by the way, this is true for exercise. You do the same amount of weightlifting in your 30s and in your 70s, you're going to build more muscle, you're going to build more bone. And so we really want to move this whole bone and musculoskeletal intervention earlier. So, the typical measuring at 65, the horse has long been out of the barn, right? And it's silly because a DEXA scan is very safe, very inexpensive. So what we're starting to see is almost all of the women's health advocates, women's health treatment platforms are, suggesting DEXA at least at the beginning of menopause. But, in my ideal world, we would know someone's peak bone density. We would test your bone at 30 or 35 because half the women are below average, right? And so
Yeah.
wouldn't those women benefit from knowing what can they be doing to optimize? Of course, we can all optimize, but they particularly need it. Maybe they didn't have great nutrition. Maybe it's just, unlucky genetics. So we have a testing mechanism that we know works. It's safe and inexpensive, and we just need to use it. There are new testing mechanisms coming out. So there's an echo light, which uses ultrasound. Can I imagine a way that you could have a wearable sort of sensing the bone's response to, vibration or other mechanisms and giving feedback? Perhaps. But, we're really focusing, in our case on the intervention. And especially, if that intervention is so safe, if half of all women are fracturing, right? We're not trying to catch a small percentage, right? We can use safe interventions.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking of a future in which maybe a wearable like an Oura ring could tell you, hey, you may think you're menopausal. Did you know that you're at increased risk for osteopenia and osteoporosis,
Right,
and help direct you to that care? I
right.
mean,
And you
oh,
start losing bone. That accelerated menopausal bone loss starts in perimenopause. So typically 2 to 3 years before the last period, right? So if you're not aware of that, you are already losing bone rapidly. So yes, intervening then is really important.
yeah. And Jill, do you see your work as connecting patients with care earlier as one of the kind of outputs of we've detected you're in this physiological state. Now what?
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to say we're good at showing uh, people what's happening in their body and why. But now, what do I do next? Is kind of the next leap in terms of really creating an incredible member experience that gets the member to the right care. You can see today we're doing some of that with connected care partners within our application, but I think there's so many more opportunities around how we direct and navigate women to the kind of care, whether it's a device like OsteoBoost or whether it is a care provider. I think that's kind of at the nexus of where a lot of the opportunity exists. One advancement that we made this year, if any of you are ŌURA wearers, you can use the advisor capability within the app, which is our AI advisor. We have created the first custom women's LLM that powers that advisor. So it's fine-tuned and trained based upon women's health clinicians, as well as the way women like to be cared for in their medical journey. And through advisor, in many cases, we're increasingly seeing questions, requests for guidance. Who should I see? What should I do for this? And that just starts to open the opportunity to provide navigation and guidance for women around where to go and what to do next. So real opportunity, people want it. And I think that connecting your data and even within that environment, being able to see your own biometric data in conjunction with what your OsteoBoost device is showing you. I've worn it. It's an incredible device. Laura knows I'm a huge fan. I think it's something every woman should have just because of its important utility in our lives. And I think in terms of connecting, what am I learning or what improvements is it making aligned with my own biometric data is a real opportunity to bring those two devices together.
Absolutely. Okay, so taking a little step back, we've been talking about some specific applications for treatment, for sensing. There is a possibility that these could interact in the future so that you could use wearables to detect a health state like perimenopause and even maybe help direct that patient using AI or other rules to a treatment that they might need. I want to bring in Marianne and Micah. So Marianne, you created FemmeHealth Alliance to help us understand and address blind spots in women's health and bring the attention, bring the money, bring the collaboration to help us get more to the solutions. When you're hearing about the barriers specifically to moving through the regulatory process, the time and money that takes, where do you think funding needs most to be directed? Where do you think is the greatest opportunity for digital health investment? Is it a specific phase of life, a specific kind of software or hardware company, or something else?
Yeah, I think it's really tied to, kind of what I said earlier. There's so many applications for women when it comes to wearables across all life stages and across multiple indications, from cardiovascular risk of disease to metabolic, to osteoporosis and so on. And I think that we are really at the point in time where I think if we talked about this, say, 10, 15 years ago, the real question was convincing investors that women's health was an investable category. I think we've moved on, from that. And we are now really at the point where we're seeing a lot of data being generated, also sex stratified data, which is really exciting. And I think that what we need to get to in terms of where we really need to focus funding on is on building that sort of interpretation layer, that layer that sits between the data that we're generating and the end utility or the systems, the healthcare systems that derive or provide that sort of clinical utility. And I think what we tend to see in the market, obviously, is building that infrastructural layer that is slow, hard work. And that is work that is behind the scenes. And that is work that doesn't get monetized as quickly as building sort of the product layer which you can monetize much quicker. You can demonstrate with investors that you have the metrics, the growth metrics and so on, which make it interesting for investors, particularly investors who are maybe not allocating long duration capital. We typically tend to work with investors who are looking to deploy long duration capital. But if we look at some of the funding mechanisms and the timeframes around that, a product would be more interesting because you can see, you have visibility on the revenue or on revenue production, whereas building the infrastructure layer, that is slow, painful, hard work. And I really think that that's sort of where we need to focus the attention on from a funding perspective, because once we have that infrastructure layer, it literally will power all of the applications that sit on top of it, just like railway lines, and then, with the railway lines, we can run lots of, applications on top of it, which then provide clinical utility for women across all of the life stages and across, different indications. That's what I would, that's where I would put my money.
That makes a lot of sense because right now it does just feel like a wall that you run into where you can have all of the great insights you need, but there's not really an infrastructure to get that into clinical care, at least in the US. And Dr. Sharp, would you agree with that as one of the most important areas for future investment, or how would you see that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of opportunities. The problem is women's health research has been in a little bit of a vicious cycle, right? Where the data isn't there, which means that the investors are not seeing the possibilities, which means that there's not enough of a market, which means that nobody creates the data. And so I think to some extent, what we are really missing is like one or two large pharma companies taking a similar bet to what they did, or medtech, right? Taking a similar bet to what Novo Nordisk did with GLP-1, right? Or what Pfizer did with Viagra. There was no market for either of those. They created the market. They created the reimbursement scenarios. They built the data, et cetera. And so I do think, I very much agree with Marianne that I think what's missing a little bit is the long-term view. There's much more VC investment going into this space, but a lot of it is going into consumer tech, digital health, et cetera, which are oftentimes not the things that are truly going to address the needs we have on the women's health side. A couple of years ago, when the entire women's health ecosystem was really kind of just getting a lot of attention, we got together with the US NIH and we started this initiative called the Innovation Equity Forum to really lay out what were some of the barriers and gaps to advance global innovation for women's health. And we came up with 50 opportunities that really span the entire ecosystem, everything from data and modeling to research design and methodologies to regulatory and science policy. And there's pieces across the entire ecosystem, and I think we are starting to see movement in some of them, but there's much more that needs to get done on that. And so I do think, I mean, what we hear a lot, particularly from institutional investors, is that they say a lot of the basic science is missing. And we do need large scale investments in the basic science in order to be able to truly create the market that will lead to sustainable innovation.
This gives me a little bit of a spicier question. So you talked a lot about the need for data and this vicious cycle where we don't fund it because we don't have the data that it's really going to work yet. And I think this is really true in cases like with OsteoBoost. This is a totally new kind of treatment. And there really wasn't evidence of, is providing stimulation to the sacrum going to prevent further loss of bone density? But with wearables, I think we're in a bit of a different situation with different motivations. So I think ŌURA has over 5 million users now. I looked it up for Whoop, I think 2.5 million users. Garmin has 45 million users. If you say, half or maybe even a third of those users are female, when it comes to the presence of wearable data across life, the data are there, but wearable companies are highly incentivized to keep that data private because it's what makes the company valuable should it need to be sold. I want to kind of open up the floor to all of you to answer this one because it's hard, but do you think that there is a way that we could move the field forward with companies sharing some of that data in a collaborative or research-oriented way to help overcome this barrier where everyone's kind of holding on to their own data, and as a result, a lot of the funding is missing.
Yeah, I don't actually fully agree with the premise
Oh, go
that
ahead.
the data isn't something that companies would want to share. I think sometimes that's true, but like if I think about it in our case, so I was focusing earlier on treatment, right? That we're a wearable that does treatment, but we actually do monitoring. We monitor if the patient uses their OsteoBoost, right? So let's say we collect this longitudinal data that they're using their OsteoBoost, and then that data can supplement the data from our clinical trial. So that's in our interest to share, right? The more we can share with clinicians how this benefits patients, I think that will motivate the clinicians to use, to refer patients to use OsteoBoost. So I don't actually see that is something that is harmful. I think it's something that we're proud to share, and we want patients. The more they know, that will encourage them to improve their health, then they'll have better results. Then that's going to essentially encourage other patients to want to use it. So I see it as a positive cycle, at least in our case.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I think would agree with Laura. There's a lot of positives. One of the decisions where, obviously, I think one of the things that really guides our motions in this space around exploring how we share de-identified, tokenized, kind of data at large from a population perspective for furthering research is it comes down to user consent and the privacy of our members. And we take that to heart. It's our top value at the company in terms of earning people's trust, particularly in women's health. It's incredibly sensitive. So designing the appropriate consents. Right now, we have kind of a motion in play where we have just a continuous, always on research study where users can actively consent at various levels. Getting more sophisticated in that space will start to then, I think, open up opportunities for where can we share this, where are users, where can they opt in to be part of further innovation and research, and where do they just want to opt out? Because at the end of the day, they're the owners of the data. So us just as a steward of that is something that we're taking very seriously, and designing that consent architecture is a big part of getting the answer here to this question, right?
And I think I want to add to that because I think that's a very interesting challenge, because I also think that from a capital markets perspective, I think the next phase of value creation in women's health will come from ecosystems, rather than sort of, single or individual companies. But I think the real question becomes, how do we create trusted frameworks where companies can contribute to scientific progress without maybe like giving away their entire competitive advantage? Because I think if we don't solve that challenge, we risk creating sort of like multiple data silos. Yeah, and I think potentially this is where organizations like People Science could play a very important role, trusted intermediaries that help to create sort of governance frameworks, consent frameworks, research partnerships that could allow knowledge to move faster than the raw data itself. Just throwing that out there.
Absolutely.
I really
that
believe
is
that. Sorry, I really believe that the data is just so empowering. I mean, if you think about, what do people love about ŌURA, right? They get that feedback, and that feedback encourages them, hopefully, to take healthy behaviors. And to the extent that that feedback is data informed, then they're going to be healthier. So I think it's the information is just so empowering to people. And of course, it needs to be de-identified. So, like, I'll just give you an example. Let's say we find out that, over time, that the people who use their OsteoBoost in the morning gain more bone than the people in the afternoon, right? Like, and in the clinical trial, that happened to be average. So now that's why wouldn't we want everyone to have that benefit, right? I don't know. I just think it's it's really a positive cycle between the patient and the company and the data set. And then it gets people into this mode of doing healthy behaviors, right? So like we see this, if you use your OsteoBoost, well, okay, here's something we don't know, but I could imagine that this would be true. You use your OsteoBoost in the morning, right? And that you've been in this mindset, okay, I'm taking care of my health. Then maybe you'll be more likely to eat healthy, or maybe more likely to go to bed at your regular times so that you can have better quality sleep. Like I do think these things interact, and the more we show patients those benefits, then it'll encourage, further improved health behaviors.
Yeah, I agree with you both, and I think that is a lot of the hope of People Science is to provide that individual platform where an individual can bring their ŌURA data, bring their subjective and objective experience with OsteoBoost, and have a personal profile of how they responded when they participated in specific experiments or contributed to specific clinical trials. So you can imagine a woman at once validating, a perimenopause to menopause automated classifier to tell you your stage, just to make something up. And at the same time, participating in a trial that validates the use of OsteoBoost in women in their early 40s or something like that. But it would be that personal shared platform where the user can have confidence that their data is protected and anonymized. And I think that the harder part that we're inching at is, would it be possible to then share those anonymized aggregated data sets to a common pool of researchers or companies to move more of the whole field forward? And Dr. Sharp, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I will say, I mean, we've been doing that a lot, for example, on the imaging side, where we're creating databases of open source databases of ultrasound images, for example, to allow development of new algorithms, etc. One of the challenges is that oftentimes you're missing the right ground truth or the right endpoints, because the data from the wearable is helpful in some way, but only if you then can tie it to certain outcomes, certain diagnoses, and I think that's oftentimes where we are missing the linkages, is that you have independent data sets that are happening in one place, and then linking those to the medical information, for example, would need to be something that the user would essentially need to independently do in order to be able to get to those endpoints, right? Like that is, so for example, what we're seeing on the imaging side is you can get millions of ultrasound data sets, but you usually can't get ultrasound data sets that are matched with CT data sets that would actually tell you whether or not what you're seeing in the ultrasound had a ground truth in a different type of imaging. And so the same is true for wearable data, where you can learn a lot from the data itself, but the real scientific breakthroughs are going to come when you can actually link it to outcomes and endpoints.
Yeah, you're speaking my language, because a lot of what we've been working on is building up that individual medical profile, where in this case, women would bring their medical history into the platform as part of their profile, bring the results of blood tests. In the case of some of the examples we've been talking about, maybe bring the date that you went into labor, the date that you conceived. And some of these things can be easy to collect with a quick questionnaire, but these more comprehensive profiles are harder to collect and maintain. I mean, on that front, you were talking about a different example of ultrasounds, but Micah, if you could wave your magic wand and have that data on both sides in a specific health area today, like, do you have a couple of top priority health areas?
I mean, I would say I think what we're really missing is longitudinal data, and really understanding outcomes of. So a couple of areas that we are very active in is, for example, I mean, pregnancy is one, and understanding, being able to predict preeclampsia, for example, and then progression to eclampsia. I think is one where longitudinal data could potentially help. Gestational diabetes mellitus is another one that would fall in there. Another area, and pregnancy to some extent is easy, right? Because you at least have a defined time period. But then you look at something like heavy menstrual bleeding, for example. One big research question for us is to understand to what extent does heavy menstrual bleeding lead to anemia, lead to adverse health outcomes later down in life, right? Those are not data sets that are easily creatable. The other one is STIs. We know that sexually transmitted infections disproportionately affect women because of, for example, pelvic inflammatory disease, etc. But there's very few studies that truly show the connection, which leads to underinvestment in a lot of these areas because we are not understanding what the long-term consequences are. And so I do think that some of those are the magic ones on truly longitudinal data sets that bring together things that are oftentimes seen as minor inconveniences, so to speak, or minor diseases, but might actually have significant impact on health outcomes later in life.
Yeah, I love the idea of, could you use some of this temperature data to detect a state of chronic low-grade inflammation, and tie that together with other symptoms. I wanted to get a little bit more into this ecosystem idea because I think we've also gotten several questions about this in the chat. So one of our attendees is asking, can we talk a little bit more about this ecosystem? What are the components of an ecosystem that would connect wearable device data or wellness companies to the EHR electronic health record or to clinicians? And are there any examples that you guys could already give? I'll leave that one open, although I think it was initially directed at Marianne. Oh, you're on mute right now.
I can try to take it.
Oh, yes. So this one was, we were talking about the need for this ecosystem that would be able to connect wearable data to clinicians, and that this is kind of a missing layer in healthcare. She wanted you to get into that a little bit more, talk about what would be the components of a system that would connect a wearable device company to a clinician's office, and are there some examples that you could share?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I speak about it really more from a capital markets perspective. And I think as an investor, raw data has limited value unless it can be standardized, validated, interpreted and translated into clinical understanding, and that gives that sort of clinical utility. And that was what I meant when I was talking about that sort of ecosystem. So I guess the question would be, how could we sort of create, this collaboration that allows us to move into combined data sets, establish reference ranges for, say, female physiology, understand what is normal at different life stages. Because I think if we can have a broader ecosystem that allows all of us to benefit, by contributing really to this common evidence layer, participating in research partnerships. This allows us to create that sort of, talking about frameworks where we can contribute to scientific data without giving away entire competitive advantage. I think that's yeah. So it was really from that perspective, not as opposed to the perspective of how do we connect it to clinicians. But I think that's where we need to go. We need this sort of ecosystem that allows us to kind of standardize things, have frameworks around how does the data look? What are the, how do we standardize it? How do we create the consent around, use of data? Because that is what allows us to move knowledge faster. That's, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's really where I was coming from.
I can give an example, Marianne, of what you're talking about, because I think you've hit on an important note around the ecosystem it takes us all coming together. A couple examples with care providers that we're working with. Maven Health, for example, large global women's health provider. Today, their clinicians are ingesting ŌURA data to faster identify an ovulatory cycles for the women that they're caring for in the attempt to get her the kind of treatments earlier in her trying to conceive journey before it results in a later stage, more higher acute intervention around IVF. And so kind of really the outcome that we're driving towards there is not only the clinical utility of ingesting cycle data and trend data from a broad perspective in the patient experience with the clinician and the patient, but also really driving towards an outcome study that will demonstrate, hey, by identifying an ovulatory cycle irregularities up front sooner, can we address those issues with, over-the-counter or prescription medications before it leads to a more invasive IVF treatment. So that's one example. We just launched a partnership with 28 Health, which is a large provider of birth control in the United States in particular. And again, those clinicians are ingesting cycle data to better inform the birth control conversation and consultation that they're having with their patients. So those are two kind of more consumer-oriented examples. We are working as well with a number of health systems to really bring the data into established EHR environments, aka Epic. And so more to come there, but establishing that clinical utility up front in terms of it truly being an asset in patient care from a clinician's point of view. It's a big journey and lots of work, but we're seeing some good early signals of that coming to life.
Those are beautiful examples. I think that is the dream is between a partnership with a wearable and other clinical provider, or simply a research platform like People Science. You could provide that place for the data and the clinical profile to come together. All right, I have a fun question, and then maybe we can move towards our wrap up and get into some more participant questions if there are some unique ones in there. And that's, if we were going to come back together in 10 years, do you realistically think we'll be there and we'll see some of these products that we've talked about today, as far as new wearable algorithms for women's health that have a clinical rubber stamp on them? And if so, why? If not, why not?
I can jump in because I'm probably so close to it. Yes, absolutely. In the areas of earlier detection, we're working on a number of incredible capabilities around these areas of PMOS, preeclampsia, to name a few, intervening in high-risk pregnancies and getting ahead of that. There's a number of organizations that are looking at claims data to do that. Pairing wearable data along with that is just kind of a really wonderful way that will get us to that detection capability of the wearable being able to signal to an individual, hey, maybe you should go talk to a clinician about this. We're seeing this in your data. So that detection is one. Number two, medication adherence through companion, whether that be addressing adherence with GLP-1. You might have noticed that ŌURA announced most recently a number of updates coming in the software, in addition to a new ring form factor that we're really excited about. And one of those companions, our first medication companion, is for GLP-1, helping the user understand what's happening across their biometric data in conjunction with the GLP-1 medication that they're taking, so that they can start to see the impacts, hopefully faster, to really power through the side effects that oftentimes pull users down from staying with the medication through that challenging initial upfront time where side effects can be more severe. We're working on some of those same detection not detection, companion capabilities for other medications. Hormone therapy is one of those. Earlier this year, we launched the birth control hormone companion. So women who are on hormonal birth control can actually see the impacts of that on their health. In terms of their biometric data. Women want more data, so do their clinicians, but they want to see the impacts of medications in terms of, should I make a change? Is this doing what I need it to do? And these things are quote unquote normal, or I can actually talk to my clinician about what I'm seeing with the data. The opportunities here for medication adherence and monitoring are endless in many regards. So we're just getting going, but the GLP-1 companion is new, and we're excited to see what it actually accomplishes.
Very cool. All right,
I can go
Marianne
next.
or
I
Laura.
think we'll see it, but I think we'll see it for specific areas and very specific populations. And somebody asked a question on saying wearables are mostly widely used by higher income, higher education consumers. And I will say, I think that is a big worry, because the truth is, I think we're going to continue to cater towards a very small portion of the population. And then even if those data sets are, even if at some point access becomes better, if all the algorithms and data are being based on a very small portion of the population, they are not going to be as accurate for populations who did not fit that original profile of who was submitting their data. And so I do think that's going to be a really important question, both from a algorithm perspective, but also from a data equity perspective on understanding how can we increase access and broaden the reach, both within the US and high income countries to lower strata of the socioeconomic strata, but also globally.
Yeah, that one is a huge challenge, especially when data can be collected on college students for large scale validations in part. I think that representative, say, sample of the demographics of the United States, if you're going to serve a US population, is key. Laura
Yeah,
and
I mean, this is something that, I mean, frankly, keeps me up at night, because we hear from patients, we're not, right now we're self-pay, we're working on getting insurance reimbursement. But, you know, poor women and rich women have osteoporosis, and we want to solve this problem for everyone. And so, of course, we're really working very hard to get this reimbursement. And I do think, you know, we will be able to, but I also think that the data is going to allow us to get the reimbursement as well, right? Because, you know, fractures mostly happen when people are in the single payer part, at least in the US, right? So Medicare is paying for almost all fractures. I'm assuming rationality that Medicare is going to want to save money by preventing fractures. And so in the grand scheme of things, our device is a lot less expensive than a fracture. And of course, over time, we'll be able to bring the cost down and make it, you know, affordable. I think in low income and low income countries, right? The device is something that you own for many years. So the cost is amortized, you know, relative to the burden of osteoporosis. I think we'll be able to get this into people's hands. That's certainly our goal and expectation.
exactly. All right, and Marianne, get the fun role of going last on this tough question.
I think that we will absolutely see more clinical utility from wearables over the next 10 years or so. But I don't think the journey will be as straightforward as it never really isn't. I think if we look 10 years back, most wearables were really quite basic, but today we're talking about, you know, sleep, heart rhythm monitoring, temperature, glucose, fertility signals, and much more. So I think the direction of travel is very clear if we're looking 10 years out. And I think for me, one of the things I think about is, you know, what actually makes the leap really into healthcare, because I think that's where things get really interesting. If we look at things like, say, atrial fibrillation detection, this has really shown us the path. There's a clear clinical problem, there is a measurable signal, and there is evidence that acting on that signal can change outcomes. And I think with that, we will see similar progress in parts of women's health. So I think as we go on this journey over the next 10 years, I think the biggest challenge will not be technology. I think it will be proving really that acting on that and the information actually changes what happens next. We are an aging society. And so, you know, being able to prevent ultimately over time should impact our healthcare systems. I think if we look at most countries around the world, healthcare systems are struggling under, this huge cost burden. So, you know, being able to really link, acting on the information to outcomes, which then in turn translate into a lower cost burden for healthcare systems around the world. That's that's really an exciting prospect to look forward to over the next 10 years.
It so is. And hearing, both the solutions and progress from Jill on things like preeclampsia, and the need to get into really specific diagnoses, both that are going to impact women who are having pregnancies later on in life, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, preterm birth even, and, providing clinical tools that serve that perimenopausal and menopausal transition. That seems like an area where we're going to see a lot of focus in the coming decade. All right, we have so many more things that we could talk about, and I think we'll probably end up answering some questions via email as well. I want to bring in Maria and Anya. If you've noted any highest priority questions we should give a final answer to, and otherwise we'll make sure we get your questions answered offline. But this has been really fun to hear all of your perspectives and to get to meet with you all today.
And I was just sending Anya a message saying how we have extremely engaged audience today, and I think it's fantastic to see that there's so much interest for this topic, and people are really thinking critically in a really different way than what it was 10 years ago when we just started Women of Wearables. Almost none of the wearable tech had any features related to women's health, and today, 10 years later, we have so much. So the ecosystem has really become more advanced, and the innovation in it. But we can definitely answer a couple of more questions in the Q&A box. We have 10 more minutes, so that's totally fine. I know that there were a few questions for ŌURA about is OsteoBoost available outside the US? Will it be available internationally? And is it covered by insurance? And I assume that a lot of you attendees are interested in OsteoBoost because perimenopause can last up to more than 10 years. So it is all about the prevention and how do we help women navigating this journey as much as possible, right?
Yeah, so in terms of internationally, we are working on that. It's not yet, we're not yet registered in any countries outside the US, but we do have some international patients who have gotten prescriptions from US doctors. We have a network of US doctors who will work with international patients. So if this is something that's of interest, I'd suggest that you email support@osteoboost.com and we can help you with that. And as I mentioned during my remarks, we are working on insurance reimbursement, and we will definitely update folks when we have that.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Great.
I also saw, I saw one that was cool. It was,
yeah, go ahead.
We're talking so much about perimenopause, but the person was asking, we don't really see a feature in any of my apps or cycle trackers or wearable devices that is showing me what to expect across a perimenopausal cycle, making predictions with that realm. Right now, things are kind of more narrowly focused, largely on younger women, regular cycles. Did you ovulate or did you not? I think we could have various people here comment, but any comments on what is coming next in terms of showing users how to understand that perimenopausal transition using wearable data?
I'll jump in here. Most recently, we launched the Menopause Impact Survey within the ŌURA experience. And so when you set up your initial ŌURA experience, you can state your intention with how you want the ring and the data to help you manage your health. In my case, I'm in perimenopause, so of course I want it to help me manage my perimenopause. And we have a menopause impact survey that really demonstrates a user can input their information and it gives the user an indication of their menopause impacts on their quality of life, whether that is mild, moderate, more extreme, based on different categories around body image, around symptoms during, hot flash symptoms, sleep quality, all of the categories, weight management, metabolic health, that impact us as we go through perimenopause. And so you have that survey information, and in your My Health, where you're tracking, the health of your sleep, your cardiovascular health, we now can track kind of, your progress in terms of managing your health in perimenopause. So not only have we validated and acknowledged kind of the symptoms that you're experiencing as a woman, we're now able to help you track any intervention work that you might do on improving your quality of life and on its impacts, and on the impacts of your sleep and your stress, and overall HRV. And so right now we started with just the kind of understanding of where I'm at in menopause, how it's impacting my quality of life. Down the road, I think there's opportunity to further connect that to detection around obviously certain symptoms like hot flashes and what that does, as well as if you're on HRT therapy, how that will impact your biometric data as well. So lots of advancements and work that we're doing on. It's much more than symptom tracking. We really want to tie it back to how can you improve your quality of life? Because I think that's what we hear from women all the time. Sleep, weight, and stress being the top three reasons and symptoms that women turn to something like wearable data to help them track this, or help them manage it ultimately. I think one final thing, we obviously are conscientious of how do we help women understand where they're at during this transition in life, and what that might look like in terms of sequencing. That is some work that's still underway that I think has the potential to help users truly understand them and their clinicians around where they're at and how that might tie back to symptoms that they're experiencing.
That's fantastic. And I guess just to add one more thing on top of that for whoever asked, that is a big goal with our people science studies, where when an individual is collecting their data on the platform, seeing some immediate feedback about did an intervention work, did an algorithm work for them. Also, we bring clinicians into that platform, idea being that your doctor could then see the results of your clinical trial and help give you that more layered interpretation in a way that would be, difficult to fully automate. All right, let's see. I'm looking through a couple of
Azure,
the
there was
questions.
one really good question maybe that I wanted to highlight from the Q&A box, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Camilla mentioned that when her device flashes, this is not a medical device and deliberately stays in the gray area by calling itself a wellness device, with something that you also highlighted in your presentation at the beginning. How can we expect users to trust it as credible? Should the wearable industry push toward clinical validation, or does that inevitably slow down innovation? I think this is a really good point and an excellent question. So whoever wants to take it.
I'll jump
I think
in.
there are,
We're living this every day. I think, wow, Camilla, you pointed out such a good, kind of tension around innovation versus clinical validation. Both have to happen, and pacing yourself across both as a wearable company is something that we do every single day. I think if on the innovation side, let's start there. We are investing, and when you innovate, you also have to be responsible in what you claim to the user that you can do. And so that's where you can continue to innovate, but not overpromise or provide claims that are not yet validated and or regulated, and approved in the way that they're supposed to be. So we are continuing to innovate, but not making claims that we shouldn't be until we've got that clinical validation and or regulatory clearance in order to do so. And parallel pathing both. We've got a really rich regulatory team that is highly educated and guiding our R&D efforts. We also have a really sophisticated clinical team that understands the utility of this and the kind of validation that we need in order to really drive the kind of healthcare impacts and guidance that we want to deliver eventually. So you've got to, everyone at the table, whether it's research, clinical, regulatory, product, and then I'm on the commercial side. It's a circular motion, and they all have to happen on this path to both innovation and clinical validation.
I want to comment on this because it's something I'm passionate about. The innovation has to be real. So sure, the FDA regulations might slow you down from making claims, but we all deserve to know what's really going to benefit our health, to invest our time and money in what's going to work. So, the FDA regulation didn't slow down our clinical trial process, but the fact that we did a clinical trial, that takes time. But patients deserve that data, right? They deserve to know, did it actually make the change? Or is there, someone just putting a claim, up on their website? So I think I don't see it as a real dichotomy, because the innovations that are really going to impact health, you want to know if they're working.
All right.
That is absolutely true. Maike, Marianne, do you have any maybe final comments as well before we wrap up?
No, exciting panel. Thank you very much for.
Excellent one. Yeah, absolutely. I cannot go through all the comments we got, but rest assured, all the chat will be saved and shared with everyone on Friday. I will collate all the resources that we get from all our speakers and partner company, and then we will send to you all on Friday. And yeah, I mean, we could speak about this for 1 more hour at least, for sure. Rest assured, we will have more webinars on this topic in the future, and I've shared everyone's LinkedIn profile so you can connect with our speakers. They were fantastic today. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. And thank you, Azure, for wonderful moderation, for very insightful questions, to People Science, our wonderful partners of this webinar. And yeah, please do connect with everyone on LinkedIn. Links are shared. Links will be shared again on Friday. Again, whoever has joined us, we are very grateful for your time today. So good luck with your businesses. I could see that we had a lot of interesting businesses, a lot of people from the ecosystem. It was really, really amazing. Wishing you all best wherever you are. Have a good evening. We are here in Europe. Have a good rest of the day to those in the US. And see you again at another WOW webinar. I think Anya can probably chime in as well.
Yes, I actually
Are you
wrote a
here? Okay,
comment
now I see you.
I wrote a comment in the chat box because I wasn't sure if I would be given the opportunity to say bye to everyone and to thank everyone, our speakers, People Science as our sponsors, and also all the attendees for joining us today. I think it was a fantastic event. I personally learned so much. So thank you for sharing all your insights, all your experiences, and we look forward to following your journey as well. And if we as well can do anything to help along the way, please don't hesitate to reach out. I think we shared all of our contact details in the chat as well. So yes,
Thank you,
all so much.
everyone. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excited to keep in
Bye-bye.
touch. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.